Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the start of the 2024 delivery of Building Life Science Adventures that One Nucleus has been running for a few years now, all focused on careers, what is good practice in employment, recruitment, building teams, and so on. So for those new to One Nucleus, we're a not-for-profit membership organisation, about 400 members, and ranging from global pharma to startups to expert advisors to coaches and HR professionals that we see contributing today, all helping us really nurture an environment for deal flow amongst those members and the wider sector. Whether that deal flow be raising investments or doing collaborative deals, whether it's finding lab spaces and those sorts of transactions and procuring services, or in the context of BLSA as a conference, the transaction that is indeed recruitment, and whether to appoint somebody and offer the position or indeed whether they would take it, and then lots of discussions around how you make that decision. But the conference for us is about career opportunities and good practice in nurturing teams. But actually, I think for me at a fundamental level, it's really about how does the sector create and offer great careers, not just great jobs. I think this has to be something that people come into our sector quite often because they're passionate about making a difference. And I think for all of us working in the sector, being able to provide an environment where that really gets recognised and optimised is the real goal. And we talk a lot, and it's all about innovation. Innovation thrives on collaboration, great teamwork, but it also thrives on diversity. And I'm really pleased that the first session today will look at neurodiversity as such a key topic to how we harness the real talent that's in and available to our sector. So I'm sure you'll come on to that later. For me, it's just a welcome from One Nucleus and thanks for joining. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mona Lisa, who's going to go through some housekeeping before you get into the real meat of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and good morning. As Tony said, the first session of today is neurodiversity. Very excited about this one. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we start. If I could kindly ask you to keep your microphones on mute. Cameras can be on and off, that's up to you. And this session will be recorded. So if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. Myself or Elisabeth will pick them up. And yeah, closed captions are also enabled should you need them. If you require that accessibility. So that's all from me. I'll now hand you over to Elisabeth, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. So we're going to do some brief introductions from each of us before we share a few slides and then cover 4 topics and then get to the Q&A at the end. So I'm Elisabeth. I am a coach. I coach individuals who are autistic and have ADHD. I also deliver workplace seminars on neurodiversity. I do this as a parent of a young adult who's been diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and through my recognition of many of the strengths and challenges within myself as well. And I do this because I know what a difference it can make to creating neuro-inclusive environments and enabling individuals to thrive in the workplace. So I'm going to hand over to André next.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is André Skepple. I'm a tech entrepreneur as well as a data and neuro-inclusion consultant, particularly in the areas of learning and development. I'm dyspraxic and dyslexic. I was diagnosed quite late. I was diagnosed age 21, late into my second year of university education. And it was one of the key things that I wanted to really work within to ensure that other people, young or old, who feel that they're part of this community of being neurodivergent and are unable to really portray their strengths, their superpowers, but also to find the right roads to career progress and the outcomes that besiege them. It's something that I've always wanted to be a part of, and this is why I'm here today. And you'll get to find out more about our stories and more what we do. But my focus is inclusion, and inclusion from a holistic perspective, particularly aided by science technology. So I'll hand it over to Mark to continue with introductions.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Mahana. I'm the Managing Director of Dynamic Minds Recruitment. We help STEM businesses attract and retain the best available talent in the marketplace. And I think the key aspect here is to realize that it's the best available talent, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, it's just the best person for the role. What really inspires me about this exciting topic is it's quite personal to myself and my family, as I have a young son who is neurodivergent, but also from a professional point of view, it's about getting the best available candidates for my clients and making sure that neurodivergent individuals are comfortable and happy in whichever company that they choose to join. So I'll hand it over to Karen.
Thanks, Mark. Morning, everyone. So I'm Karen Saunders from KS Coaching and Consulting. Really, I'm passionate about bringing out the best in people, so enabling personal growth and ultimately business success at the end of the day too. So I'm an executive coach, predominantly working with leaders all the way through from developing leaders to MDs, CEOs. I also run some team development, generally in the field of leadership as well, so it complements the coaching side. What I do quite often in recent years, it's been around sort of a reset and a refocus of teams. Who are we today? How do we want to be? What's our purpose? How do we go forward? My professional background is the best part of 20 years in HR, all the way up to HR director level. The majority of time there was spent in life sciences. So hence my subject interest today in terms of the industry. And the main reason I'm here is to show that actually I'm not an expert in neurodiversity, neuroinclusion. However, I think it's important to recognise that this is the case for many HR leaders and management leadership in general. But it's okay, you don't have to be an expert to care and to recognise the importance of embracing neurodiversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Thank you, Karen, André and Mark, for keeping your introductions brief. We're very conscious of how little time we've got for this vital topic today, but we hope that today will be a conversation starter. And as Mona Lisa mentioned, we'll come back to your questions at the end. Please put them in the chat. If you prefer to ask your questions verbally, then you will be able to do that at the end, time permitting as well. So our objectives for today are really to raise awareness and advocate for working with neurodiversity in the life sciences. And we've got these 4 topics, which each of us will lead. So we hope to take you through some of the concepts and language, how we can celebrate and harness the strengths, recruit for talent, and create an inclusive environment. So not a lot really, but plenty. So understanding the concepts and language. This is an area that is still relatively young. So I just want to set the scene with some of the concepts and language which you may or may not already be familiar with. So I'd like to start with comparing neurodiversity to biodiversity. We've got this beautiful garden here with lots of beautiful individual plants and flowers, and each one is thriving because it's got exactly the conditions that it needs for that. And that might be nutrients, water, the amount of light, the space. And the same is true for neurodiversity. We are all unique. We each have unique needs that will enable us to thrive. And each one of us is beautiful in those strengths that we bring. So the terminology is evolving. I stole this sentence at the bottom, I think, from André. It's still an emerging topic. One day there will be no labels, but for the moment, here are just some of the terms that you might hear, some of which we've already started using today. So neurodiversity is the diversity of the human race, how we are each uniquely wired. Neurocognition, how our brain works, so it will affect how we think, how we feel, how we move, how we interact with each other, everything. Neurodivergence is the so-called divergence from the norm, whatever that might be. The stats are 15 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. I believe it's more than that, only time will tell. Neurotypical is supposedly the norm, and neurominorities are those who are neurodivergent. One of the organizations that I work with is Genius Within, and this slide shows some of the neurominorities that are out there, and both Genius Within and I and others who work in this field really like to focus on the strengths that we bring, as well as supporting the challenges, finding ways to support the challenges. So you can see that people who are dyslexic or have dyscalculia may be more creative. People who are autistic may be more honest, more direct, and have greater sensory awareness. So often these different neuro conditions overlap. And the more I'm learning about this, the more you might learn about this, you know, we would discover that there are strengths in common, there are unique strengths and challenges as well. You may have come across the concept of spiky profiles, and the suggestion is that people who are neurodivergent tend to be more specialist thinkers and will have what some people call superpowers, strengths, things that we are particularly strong in. And it might be an ability to recognize patterns between ideas or between data, ability to see a bigger picture or to really home in on the detail. Just different cognitive functions that we may have strengths in. And then by the same token, we will have the troughs in this spiky profile, areas where we might have greater challenges, and it might be to do with prioritizing and organizing tasks, managing time, dealing with sensory stimuli. It could be a whole range of things. And again, you can find out more about this from Genius Within, amongst other sources. The other factor that can be really important for people who are neurodivergent is that of intersectionality. And what I mean by this is that we may often be struggling with other things that affect our sense of being different or not fitting in. And it could be to do with our sexuality, our racial identity, our gender, our nationality, other disabilities that can mean that we feel marginalized or that can cover up autism or ADHD or dyscalculia and result to misdiagnosis. And for many of us who are neurodivergent, we will from a very early age have masked or covered up who we really are in order to try and fit in with other people. And all of this can lead to mental health issues. So if you are someone who is supporting individuals in the workplace, being aware of some of these other factors that might be playing in could be really important. And I want to end with never assume is a phrase I stole from Karen, but never assume, because when you've met one neurodivergent person, you've only met one neurodivergent person. One person who's autistic will be different in every way, in many ways from another, just as we are each unique. And if someone says to you, I am autistic, one of the best things you can do is to ask them, and what does that mean for you? Because it will be different from someone else. So those are the introductory slides that I wanted to share. And we've got a few more minutes that we can spend on understanding the concepts and language. So I'd like to just ask if any of our panel members wants to add anything to that.
Can I just ask one question, Elisabeth? It's Andy.
And can I just check with the panel members and Andy, then I'll come straight back to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. It may be none of my panel members are indicating that they want to chip in, so I'll come straight to you, Andy. Yes.
No, all it was is, are the terms neurodiverse and neurodivergent interchangeable, or are they, we're talking about language here,
Yeah.
or are they very different?
Great question. So in my experience, and it will be different for different people, neurodiversity is the whole of the human race.
Right.
Neurodivergent is more specific to the neurominorities.
Okay.
Great question. And we have got time for a few more questions.
Can I just step in there as well, just to expand on that? So normally the most appropriate language that I feel is adequate for these conversations, particularly for those that are talking about neuroinclusion for the first time, is to keep it quite plain. You're talking about people with neurodevelopmental conditions. So one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to use the term, you call someone neurodivergent or neurodiverse, but what you're doing is that you're just stating the adjective of determining the difference in thought or difference in how minds are shaped within the community or within the establishment that you're in. But if you're actually talking about the individual, they have a neurodevelopmental condition. So you use that as a term to determine that there's a condition that enables them or determines them to be neurodivergent. But then once you then understand in terms of what the condition is and able to then really filter down to what part of the spectrum that they align themselves to be or the intersections within it, then you can start to really be more precise. But it's like what Elisabeth mentioned in the previous slides. At some point, we don't want to have conversations that determine labels or the decorum of how to identify people. It'll pretty much be André, Elisabeth, Karen, Mark, yourself, Andy. The profile of what we have, once we understand and really get to determine and celebrate our differences in terms of how our minds are mapped.
Thank you, André. And I think if in doubt, ask the person, ask the individual, and use
not be afraid to ask the question.
And use the language they would like to ask. However, don't dive straight in with, oh, I think you might be autistic, because that is absolutely not appropriate. It's not our job to diagnose other people. It's up to them to say what they need.
Do you think there is a concern about people who aren't neurodivergent asking the question of somebody who they think is, or who says they are, about what that means for them? Do you think, because people do seem quite nervous about saying the wrong thing, and that's why this whole language thing is so important.
I think if in doubt, ask the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about, I mean, one of the key things we have to always remind ourselves that we're in a society that, you know, really establishes ourselves on having high levels of communication. So stick to that. Be able to engage with the individual to try and understand or determine how they like to be addressed or how they like to be referenced within that conversation. But also, talking from an individual perspective, don't get labored into the correctness of the politics. You want to have a conversation with someone, you don't want to sanitize it too much where you get to lose the principle of the conversation. So as long as you can engage with them as an individual to the point where they understand and fully realize that you're not coming across threatening or you know, any type of way that will, you know, really limit their value, then it doesn't matter. Just explore the terms and explore the way to hold a dialogue, and then it should organically take you to the point of determining each other.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Andy. And I'm aware we didn't check for anyone if anyone else had questions. I didn't see any in the chat. So by all means, other people who are listening to this session, if there's something you'd really like to ask a question about live verbally, use the reaction button, you know, at the bottom of your screen so that I know you want to ask a question. But we're now moving on to our second topic, which is André's. So André, the floor is yours, but hopefully we'll have a chance to hear from some of the other panel members too.
Wonderful, thank you for the introduction, Elisabeth. So I'm going to start off this particular section, by saying something that I don't think it'll be viewed as controversial. I think it is quite thought-provoking. But I'm going to say something that might trigger people, and I'm more than happy to have conversations about this as a challenge to this statement. But my statement is this, and I say this whenever I talk about this subject in conferences or in sessions like this, I say this: there's no such thing as being neurotypical. Everybody's neurodivergent. When we establish in terms of what the full spectrum of neurodivergence is, then that will be the day that we can stop putting people in two categories, which is something that particularly in British society, we really do quite a lot, and it's quite a limiting force. So we're all neurodivergent. So within that, we have to determine what our difference is in order to embrace it, to celebrate it, and as it says in the slide, to harness it. So I'll give you an example, and this is one of the key things that we must do as individuals, but also as a collective, to ensure that we can achieve true new inclusion within organizations. So, as I said in my introduction earlier, I'm dyspraxic and dyslexic. I was diagnosed quite late. It took me 5 years to get my diagnosis. And upon that realization, I then used those terminologies to really get to understand, well, it makes sense why I can't do this and I struggle to do that and so on and so forth. But what can I do? What am I brilliant at? What is my superpower? So one of the quintessential ways of coming across this discovery, especially for someone who is just self-discovered, who may have the different inklings that they may have a neurodevelopmental condition that then also provides them a neurodevelopmental advantage. The conversation is this: well, okay, what are you good at doing? What have you perfected at? So my superpower, for example, and what I discovered in terms of what my superpower was, particularly working within science, is that whereas my dyspraxia means my coordination hands-eye is not great, and with my dyslexia, my visual sensitivity or my working memory can be very sporadic. I'm also quite innovative. I'm very attentive in terms of data and how the bigger picture can be really commentated and discussed from large samples of information that has been pulled through, because my mind is developed to bring in a lot of information. But also it's the ability to take complex elements and turn them into dialogue that can be engaged with everyone. So this is an example in terms of when you really start to understand and reflect in the things that you enjoy doing, the things that you do best, and have the ability to communicate it to other people, then once you're able to, look at the trends, look at the condition versus the outcome, or condition versus the output, or the condition and the output with the impact. What is that one individual good at doing within their zone of influence that can have that ripple effect to actually impact on their institution, their organization, the wider environment, society? So I close this part there in terms of really having these conversations and really showcasing our ability to celebrate and to identify not just our weaknesses, because we're very good at doing that. You can tell me I can't do this, can't do that, and especially in the workplace, we do appraisals, then we start to parameter, areas of improvement. But then also focus, the positive psychology element, focus on what are they best at doing, what are they able to do, and what type of impact that individual can portray. And so I'll leave this in closing by someone who's been through the system, who's told you can't do this, you can't do that, and having issues and trying to achieve various different subject matters or areas of attainment. One of the key things that I consider my impact was because of all those different strengths and how I've been able to celebrate them. I'm now building an AI-based curriculum that's going to transform how the national curriculum affects neurodivergent individuals across country, soon to be across the world. So these are all elements where if you put them into an environment that celebrates and really amplifies what the powers are, the impact can be pretty spectacular. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, André. Thank you. And thank you for sharing, your own personal experience of that as well. I would just add one other thought, which is that when I'm working with individuals who are autistic, have ADHD, often there's an inclination to take our strengths for granted and not really appreciate that they are strengths that other people don't have, that the things that we find easy to do, we just assume everyone else can do that. And it's only as we start exploring it that we find actually, no, this is something that's unique to ourselves. So Karen or Mark, do you have something you'd like to add? Yeah,
I'm just happy to add from the sort of employment perspective, I guess from the side of sort of managers and leaders. For me, everything that André said highlights the importance of treating people as individuals, people as people. I think, and it's possibly a bit old school now, but for managers and leaders, busy people who are time and resource poor, the ideal outcome for them is to have a one-size-fits-all where they can apply the same rules to everybody, because then they know what they're doing, and that's a big tick in the people management box. But that's not reality, is it? It's about finding out the individual strengths that they can bring to the table, and understanding, that there are spectrums to work through within this, and that's okay, but to not shy away from having the conversation. And the other point, just to pick up from André, a lot of what managers and leaders can focus on is outcomes with individuals as well. So what are the strengths that everyone can bring to the table, and what are the impact and the outcomes that they can have in the business as a consequence?
Thank you, Karen. I think Mark, you had, yes, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to add two vital benefits for businesses really when it comes to having neurodivergent individuals in your operation, which is key to any business, which is it's estimated that you'll get 30% better productivity levels from a neurodivergent individual compared to a neurotypical one. That's estimate, of course, but also something which is very important, you'll certainly get reduced attrition rates, but that is only if you make the necessary adjustments within your business to ensure that neurodivergent individuals are happy, they're comfortable. If so, they will stay with your business. Those are the two benefits I wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Mark. And we'll be hearing more about those adjustments when we come to Karen's topic at the end. Again, we've got a minute or two if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to raise a question. I don't think we've got any in the chat yet, but if people want to ask verbally, by all means, raise your hand. Okay, in that case, we will move on to the next topic, which Mark is leading for us on recruiting for talent. I just want to share a couple of slides before we do that by way of scene setting. So one of them is this one, which is really just to say that the whole employment cycle, from attraction all the way through to leavers, and sometimes they do leave, but I agree with was it Mark who said that the attrition rate is often lower, and we can explore why that is. So the whole recruitment cycle, the whole employment cycle provides opportunities for being neuro-inclusive. And that's about human resources and line managers being inclusive and supportive. And it's also about aiding individuals to be aware and advocate for what they need and what they want to thrive in the environment. And the other slide I just wanted to show was that under the Equality Act of 2010, neurodivergent workers are likely to meet the legal definition of disability. And this provides them with important rights to reasonable adjustments, protection from discrimination, harassment, and victimization. However, not all neurodivergent workers will consider themselves to be disabled. And so we have the right to identify or not identify with the term as we see fit. However, we can still, and I'll come back to this later, we don't need to have a diagnosis to approach occupational health or HR and ask for the adjustments that will enable us to thrive. So I just wanted to set the scene with those. Over to you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Elisabeth. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that receiving a diagnosis for neurodivergent condition can be quite overwhelming, but also very challenging for certain individuals. However, some might take to it like a duck to water and really run to it, because it could be that they finally have an answer to some of the internal questions that they've been struggling with. I think it is therefore imperative that businesses strive to really create a neuro-inclusive and disability-friendly environment where everyone can thrive, regardless of what their neuro divergent status might be or how they identify. And I think key to achieving those objective is to ensure that businesses address the stigma around neurodiversity by using inclusive language in your job ads and all other forms of communications. Something quite basic, such as making sure that the job ad is concise and jargon-free, but also at all times, please refrain from making any assumptions. Use neutral language at all times. The last thing you want to do is to offend somebody or create an opportunity where they'll feel nervous about communicating specific needs to you. Something else that I would recommend as part of the hiring process is consider using alternative application methods such as video uploads. What does that mean? It means that candidates could perhaps have 3 to 5 technical questions that they can answer at their own leisure. And by doing this, you will get the best version of them. And in addition to that, I would also roll out neurodiversity training programs across the business to ensure that hiring managers and HR teams are fully equipped and knowledgeable so that they can manage the hiring and onboarding process effectively. A typical example of this might be that when they do interview a candidate, they would not be taken aback because an individual is not making eye contact or they're only giving short and direct answers. Because they've been through that training and they've had that exposure, it would not be something new to them, which will therefore not put the candidate in a disadvantaged position. And when it comes to the interviews, I will encourage you to structure the interviews to focus on specific job-related competencies, instead of relying on just a broader, general, unstructured conversation where you then aim to assess the candidate's ability. But when you agree on the structure, please communicate this prior to the interview with the candidate, just to make sure they are aware of what the process will be. And finally, what I would businesses encourage to do is to partner with organizations and communities that support neurodivergent individuals. So it might be a case of just really throw yourself into the communities by attending job fairs, networking events, making use of referrals, just to ensure that you're able to position yourself in the best possible way to attract the talent. Because we have some really, really special, talented people out there at the moment that's not being utilized. If we come together and create an environment where they feel comfortable, they can certainly give their best to the business, which will be a massive benefit. So those are my 5 key recommendations in terms of the strategies that organizations can implement to ensure that their recruitment process is inclusive.
Thank you, Mark. That was a really great overview in a very few minutes. Does anyone on the panel have something they would like to add to what Mark has shared? Karen.
I'm happy to add. Just I think really, really good advice from Mark there. Actually, I think again, And it's almost back to one of the questions sort of Andy was asking earlier on about how to talk to people, how to do things differently. Well, to say something rather than nothing is generally key. And with Mark saying, you know, you can have a bit of training sessions to get ahead of onboarding and recruitment knowledge for managers and leaders and HR individuals out there, then they're hopefully going to have richer conversations and spot things that they might not have noticed on first glance without that training. And so it's about getting clued up, not about becoming an expert, but enabling a richer conversation, I would say. So great advice from Mark there, I think, and getting into the community as well makes really good sense.
And we had a question in the chat from Jeff about neurodiversity and performance management, which I'm kind of thinking might come into your topic, Karen. Will you be able to address Jeff's question there?
Potentially, I can give it a go. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There was one thing I did want to comment on, if that's okay, Elisabeth, and it was actually your slide that just came in ahead of Mark's section, but which I think complements it too. It's actually the one prior to that about the Equality Act in terms of employment law. As someone who used to run employment law workshops internally in my HR roles that I've had previously, personally, I think what's absolutely key is just because there's a law, that shouldn't be the key reason for giving attention to neurodiversity and inclusion, just because you could be liable for some costs or being taken to court. For me, it's always about that it deserves attention because it's the right thing to do and it's the kind thing to do. And for me, that's something I'd always say against anything that comes under the Equality Act, any kind of discrimination that could be out there. The catalyst for us doing anything within an organisation, in my view, shouldn't be that base level because we might get tripped up by a law. It's because actually it's probably in line with what we say we do as a company, our values and our culture that we want to push forward, and this would come under the umbrella. So it's a slight tangent, I recognise, but to put that back into the recruitment aspects, everything that Mark's saying complements. This is about doing the right thing and the kind thing and being inclusive from an employment perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. So, Jeff, we will come back to your question within Karen's section. Either Karen will address it directly or I will. I think we're just deciding between us over the camera. So yeah, any other questions on recruitment before we move on to the final topic, which is about creating an inclusive environment? I see we've got something popped up in the chat, so I'll just check for that. Oh, that's a thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, we will come back to you. Okay, so let's move on to the last topic, which is about creating an inclusive environment. And Karen, just before you launch, I'm just going to share this slide, which is really about ways to identify an inclusive environment, ways to create an inclusive environment. Have one-to-one conversations. If you are a line manager, I would hope you're having one-to-one conversations anyway. And making sure that that conversation is not just about the task, but it's also about the person, how the person is, what they need, what they want from you as a manager to enable them to thrive. Team sharing. So having team building, sharing exercises where everybody talks about what they need individually, what they want individually to enable them to thrive, rather than just going, oh, you've had a diagnosis, what do you need? And singling individual people out, actually creating a brave space, some people call this, where everyone can share what they need and want. Any individual can make use of access to work. So they can request, they can go to occupational health or HR and ask for a workplace assessment, or from other facilities that are available through Access to Work, which is a government-supported scheme where funding is provided for employers to be able to support individuals with workplace assessments, with coaching, with other things, organising neurodiversity awareness training. All these things are possible. And the pandemic was an amazing opportunity for many individuals to start asking and start having things that they need in terms of more flexible working hours, the kind of working environment and technology that supports them. And other things that we can do in this space is give individuals the opportunity to shape their roles and responsibilities in a way that really speaks to their strengths. Coaching such as I do and Karen does, one-to-one, or even coaching an individual and their manager together to help them find ways to work together more effectively, and neurodiversity awareness training. So I just wanted to share that give that overview of ways in which you can create a proactive inclusion, but Karen has a lot more to say in this space, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Elisabeth. Just going to take a little step back in terms of my HR career. One of the things, if anyone on here has met me before, you'll know I'll tend to say not many people come to HR with good news. It's generally a problem, something that's gone on, usually a bearer of bad news. And in the time that I spent within HR, I would whittle a lot of that down to some kind of breakdown in trust and rapport, and getting communication right with people. And so one of the things that's really important to me, and I think it is a foundation behind neurodiversity and neuroinclusion as well, is to remember that you're going to struggle to build any kind of relationship with people if you're not engendering a culture of that's trusting, that people can feel that they're included, that they can feel engaged enough to want to speak out. I think at the start of this, we were saying, we think the figures for neurodiversity are a lot higher, in my understanding, than what's actually reported. So some people either don't know it, or they don't want to talk about it. And the only way they're going to feel more comfortable is if we create inclusive environments for people to be able to engage with that. So while I go back to the whole, you don't have to be an expert in the subject, you do have to recognise that it's important. And so think about who you can go to, what's out there for you to get yourself clued up. Mark gave some great examples already in his bit under talent and recruitment. But the key principles that I guess I would always fall back on as someone who's not an expert in the subject is don't assume, one size doesn't fit all, as I said. But be curious, don't shy away from a conversation. Saying nothing can often be more damaging than trying to say something that you can acknowledge might be a bit clumsy and clunky. However, if, as André was saying earlier, if it's positioned well enough and the person has the trust in you that you're being authentic with them and you're trying your hardest to get to a good space with them, you're going to build some engagement and some trust in that as well. So be curious, be guided by the individual for what they need to do to perform at their best at work. And listen, really listen. You're not there to have all the answers. Seek to understand. As I say, it's not about being that expert, it's understanding from the individual and trusting in them that they know best for themselves. So a few key steps within that, covered a little bit by Mark as well: raising awareness, upskilling your HR team and your leaders, and indeed the rest of the organisation. It might be for HR and your leaders that you can focus that on recruitment, onboarding, and indeed things such as performance management. But it's actually helping to raise awareness and build a general understanding across an organisation. And that will also help the trust and inclusive element to build and build. For managers, I think it's important to get to know your people as individuals. Now, this isn't something I'm saying is new under neuro-inclusion, neurodiversity. Get to know your people as individuals. What do they enjoy? What do they find challenging? What are the strengths they can bring to the table for you? And actually, you know, don't wait for people to tell you they're neurodivergent. It's not something that should be there. So for example, if you're inviting requests for workplace adjustments, ask for them, invite them from all. Don't just pigeonhole sectors of your organisation. If you're inviting requests for workplace adjustments from all, then you're normalising a conversation across your organisation. It's also important to remain attentive to well-being for all employees, because it can be flipping stressful for anyone who might be harbouring neurodiversion, or someone who just feels that they're out of their depth in the world that they're working in. The other point there, though, is for leaders or the more senior leaders to allow space for managers to have time with their people, to have these conversations, not to make it a quick 5 minutes. How are you? What do you need? Go, go, go. There needs to be some space allocated to the people management of those roles. And so then just a few more examples of reasonable adjustments to add to the list that Elisabeth, that you just shared. Doesn't have to be super complicated. Some may be, some may not, but it could be thinking about the work environment you're in. Is it too loud? Is it too quiet? What space is there? The wonderful open plan environments are not ideal for everyone. I'm in theory, I don't have I'm not on a spectrum in terms of I'm not neurodivergent as far as I'm aware. Goodness me, I need some quiet spaces within times as well. So quiet rooms, noise cancelling headphones, could be assistive technology, speech to text, could ensure that people are allowed to have their cameras off during Teams or Zoom meetings. It might not be everyone's preference to be present. Thinking about giving specific detail when you're given a work brief, giving some visual information to support auditory information, ensuring agendas are giving out in advance for meetings, and if there any information to review ahead of a meeting as well. So I guess what I'm saying is where you can put structure in, then do so. And I'm going to stop there because I know I'm going over my time.
Thank you, Karen. That was a terrific overview. And Jeff, as I was listening to Karen, it sounded to me like she was ticking off all the things that one would need to be conscious of for performance management as well. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that's missing for you, or if you still got a kind of a lingering question from what Karen shared.
No, I think that's broadly covered it. Thank you very much.
Can I also add something in terms of the question you raised, Jeff, about performance management? And something that I felt that was really useful during my time working within the bioscience industry. Personality testing. Psychometric testing was a really, really good tool to identify what type of worker profile or individual profile we had that can be managed, and is one of the key things, you know, is having those metrics, you know, to be able to measure and monitor. So there are a number of different tools that are out there that you can use within the context of HR and workforce management, that you can really start to layer up and start to measure and track various different strengths and weaknesses, so that it's in accordance to what you're trying to build, which is a productive workforce, and something that can be more tailored towards the individual. And something that my company is doing, we're building AI to really help to track and monitor how those metrics of performance management can be better individualized to an individual despite their neurodevelopmental status or condition. So these are, I would always recommend the use of diagnostic tools and assessment batteries as a way to provide a much more quantitative as well as qualitative mechanism to managing a high performance environment.
Great, thank you. If I could just add to that, I'm glad you mentioned that, André, because that's actually part of my background. And just like any area, there are people who have a sort of contemporary understanding of assessment batteries, but there are myths and legends that are sometimes quite out of date. And these often stem from assessment methods that were in use many years ago. in terms of contemporary assessment methods, one of the key conclusions around teams is that teams are undoubtedly made up of people with who bring different things to the party, and that people adapt to other people in the team. And that's sort of not that sounds blindingly obvious now, but for a long time, team assessment batteries did tend to sort of label people and say, you will always play this role in the team, whereas this person will always play that role. In reality, we do tend to adapt to each other much more. I think the second point that I thought was really useful, André, was you used the term strengths. And one of the things that I always encourage people to think about is building on people's strengths. It's very easy to get bogged down in working out what you can't do. If you actually focus on where your strengths lie, your performance tends to improve.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that. And you've led us very gracefully into the final Q&A. So we've got a few minutes to take questions from anyone who would like to ask them at this point. I can't believe we've already got to this point in our panel discussion today. So yeah, either put your questions in the chat or raise your virtual hand, and we can take any further questions for today's session. While we're waiting for them, I'll also put up the final slide, which has got all our contact details, so you can follow up with any one of us that you would like to after today's session. So I'll just wait a little bit more, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, we'll do a round. I'm forewarning you, André, Mark, and Karen, that perhaps what one word or sentence would you like to end today with, if looks like we don't have any other questions. So I'm going to reserve my contribution to the end because I haven't thought of anything yet, but it looks like Andre's ready to go. Your final sentence.
My lasting note to everyone is embrace the dialogue of difference. Always welcome the divergence or the how colorful your environment is, so you can embrace it and really work on people's strengths, really focus on their strengths, really focus on the ability to provide impact and outcomes to your organization.
Thank you, André. Who's ready to go next? Marcus, go for it.
Yes, in my experience, people tend to be apprehensive about things they don't really know about much, and therefore I would say raise awareness internally as often as possible. Make sure that your workforce is educated on the subject matter. It might be that they have things that they themselves deal with outside of work that you're not aware of, and by actually providing a platform and enabling them to gain that knowledge, is a win for them, but it's also a win for the business.
Thank you, Mark. Karen, have you got something?
I'm up. Yeah, I'm at the risk of repeating myself. There's still the don't assume, but it's more about being curious. I think there's the opportunity always for a rich blend of people who can bring so much into a workplace. It does take a bit of investment in terms of time and resource and an open mind, to be honest. I firmly believe that return on investment is there. It's there for the company. It really is. So build that curiosity, and maybe even if it's just small steps to start with, a small step's better than no step at all.
And I thought of mine, which is about creating that brave space for conversation between an individual and their manager, within a team, and if needs be, provide that resource. I'm going to sell it to provide some coaching for the individual so that they can find the strengths that they've got and the way to talk about what they need in the workplace. Thank you to the whole panel. I think Mona Lisa might be chipping in now to help us wrap up. Is that right?
Oh, yes, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you to the panel for this very, very insightful session. I hope you all enjoyed it. And just to say, the next session is at 10:30 on how to develop the best team. So I hope you all can join us. Yes, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. Should we stay on
Thank you.
we wrap up? Yeah.
So I will now stop recording.